My father-in-law threw the divorce papers onto the dinner table, laughing as my fiancé's new wealthy suitor smirked. Sign it, Arthur. A lazy bum like you doesn't belong in our family. I didn't say a word. I just signed it, because my 5-year classified tour of duty had ended exactly 10 minutes ago. My father-in-law, Richard, leaned forward, his expensive gold rings clinking against his wineglass. His eyes were cold, filled with years of pent-up disdain as he stared at my worn jacket. You've spent 5 years wandering the country like a parasite, Arthur, he sneered. My daughter deserves a real man, not a useless drifter who can't even pay for his own dinner. I looked at Evelyn, my fiancée of 5 years. She sat across from me in a beautiful silk dress, her long platinum blonde hair framing her face. She refused to meet my gaze, staring down at her plate as if I were a stain on the tablecloth. Her silence was a sharper betrayal than any words her father could spit, confirming she had given up on me. Beside Evelyn sat Julian, a smug young politician in a tailored dark blue suit. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a thick envelope, and slid it across the table toward me. There is $10,000 in there, Arthur, Julian said with a mocking smile. Consider it a relocation fee. Just sign and walk away, before we have to call security. I ignored the envelope, picked up the silver pen, and signed my name on the bottom line of the paper. I stood up slowly, picking up my old, faded military duffel bag from the floor. Richard laughed, taking the signed papers and waving them in the air like a trophy. I turned my back on them and walked out, leaving the mansion without another word. The heavy oak doors of the mansion shut behind me, cutting off the sound of their cruel laughter. I stepped out onto the wide stone porch, and the cold night rain instantly soaked through my thin shirt. I walked down the long, paved driveway, my boots splashing in the deep puddles as the wind howled through the dark trees. 5 years ago, Evelyn had held my hand at the train station, crying and promising she would wait for me forever. I was recruited into a highly classified special operations unit, a shadow division that officially did not exist. For security reasons, I couldn't write, call, or tell her where I was going, leaving her in complete darkness. To the rest of the world, I was just a civilian contractor who had walked away from his life. My records were locked behind a triple encrypted government firewall, showing my status as inactive and unemployed. I endured hell in the muddy jungles and freezing mountains, believing I was protecting the woman I loved back home. I survived shrapnel wounds, weeks of isolation and interrogation, always holding on to the memory of her smile. I thought that if I could just make it back home, the nightmare would end. But when I returned 2 weeks ago, I found a completely different world where my sacrifices meant absolutely nothing to her. Evelyn's family business had boomed, catapulting them into the city's wealthiest elite. They moved into a luxury estate, wore designer clothes, and spent their weekends at exclusive country clubs. And with their new wealth came a new ambition that had no room for a man they thought was a failure and a drifter. When I first knocked on their door, Richard didn't even let me pass the foyer. He told me I was a leech trying to steal his family's hard-earned money. Evelyn had stood behind him, looking at me with a mixture of embarrassment and disgust, completely brainwashed by her father's lies and Julian's promises of power. They told me Julian was a rising star in the local government, a man who could secure millions in state contracts for their shipping firm. They made it clear that I was an obstacle to their grand plans. Tonight was their final play to get rid of me, and they thought they had won their perfect victory. I reached the iron gates of the estate, my clothes dripping wet and my hands freezing. I walked to a nearby bus stop, the yellow light of the street lamp casting long, shaking shadows on the wet pavement. I sat on the metal bench, pulling a black, military-grade encrypted phone from the bottom of my bag. This phone had been silent for 5 long years, a dead weight in my pocket that reminded me of my duty. I pressed the power button, and the screen glowed a dull, tactical green in the cold darkness. A notification flashed across the screen, declassification sequence complete. Operational status, returned. Active rank, Commander. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest with a mixture of relief and anticipation. The official orders had finally cleared the Pentagon database, restoring my real identity and my high-ranking clearance. I was no longer a ghost or a parasite. I was a decorated officer with the full weight of the military behind me, ready to take back my life. I dialed a highly secure, 12-digit emergency number that I had memorized during my grueling survival training in the mountains. The line rang once, and a sharp, commanding voice answered immediately from the secure bunker. Task Force Omega, Command Center. State your identification code and clearance level immediately. This is Commander Arthur Vance, I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. My declassification is complete, and my active status is restored. My identification code is Echo 9er7 Alpha. I am requesting immediate tactical deployment and arrest protocol at my current location. The target is active. There was a brief, tense pause on the line, followed by the rapid clacking of computer keys in the background as they ran my voice in code through the satellite verification system. Code verified, Commander Vance. Welcome back to active service, sir. We have already locked onto your GPS coordinates. What are your orders? Send the armored tactical convoy to the Richard Estate on Oak Ridge Drive immediately, I commanded. We are executing a high-priority federal arrest warrant on Julian Vance for high treason, government corruption, and illegal weapons smuggling. I will meet the tactical squad at the main gates in 10 minutes. Understood, Commander. 5 armored SUVs and an elite tactical squad are already patrolling in your sector and have been redirected. General Vance, General Carter, and General Hayes are currently en route to witness the operation in person. Expected arrival time at the estate is 10 minutes. Stand by, sir. Out. I hung up the phone, a cold, sharp smile crossing my face in the dark. Julian thought he was clever, using Richard's shipping business to fund his corrupt political campaign. He had no idea that my unit had been monitoring his illegal logistics network for the past 6 months, waiting for this exact moment to strike. I stood up from the cold metal bench, my wet clothes no longer feeling cold as the adrenaline surged through my veins. I walked back toward the estate, the wind whipping the heavy rain against my face. As I approached the main iron gates, I could see the warm, golden light spilling from the tall ballroom windows. The long driveway was lined with expensive sports cars and luxury sedans belonging to the city's elite. Richard was hosting a massive celebration, inviting the wealthiest residents to toast to Evelyn and Julian's upcoming union. They were celebrating their new business empire, completely unaware that it was built on lies, corruption, and stolen data. I walked past the open iron gates, my boots crunching softly on the wet gravel under the cover of the darkness. No one stopped me. The security guards at the entrance were distracted, looking at the arriving luxury cars. I walked straight toward the grand glass doors of the ballroom, ready to end their party. I pushed the heavy glass doors open, stepping directly into the warmth of the crowded ballroom. The string quartet stopped playing for a brief second, and several wealthy guests turned to look at the wet, disheveled man standing in the doorway. I stood there, a dark shadow in the middle of their bright, perfect world. Richard spotted me. Immediately, his face reddening with instant anger as he set his champagne glass down on a passing tray. He marched across the polished marble floor, his expensive leather shoes clicking loudly. Arthur! What the hell are you doing back here? He whispered fiercely, his eyes blazing. I told you to leave. Security, get over here. Evelyn walked over behind her father, her cold ocean blue eyes scanning my wet, muddy clothes with deep embarrassment. Arthur, please, she said, her voice filled with annoyance and exhaustion. You signed the divorce papers tonight. You have your money. Why do you have to come back and make a scene in front of all our guests? I don't care about your pity money, Evelyn, I said quietly, keeping my voice low so the guests wouldn't hear. I only came back to get my father's old silver watch. It was still in the drawer in my room upstairs, and it's the only thing of value I have left in this house. Julian joined them, his hands slid into his pockets, his smug smile wider than ever. The cheap silver watch, he laughed loudly, drawing the attention of several nearby guests. I had the servants throw that trash in the dustbin yesterday, Arthur. A parasite's garbage doesn't belong in a luxury house of this caliber. Get used to it. My jaw tightened, my fists clenching at my sides as a wave of heat surged through me. That watch was the only thing my father had left me before he passed away in the hospital. You threw my father's watch in the trash? I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that made Julian's smile flicker. Yes, I did, and I would do it again, Julian sneered, stepping closer to me to show his dominance. And now, we are going to throw you out of this estate for good. Security, get over here and take this useless trash out to the street where he belongs. Make sure he doesn't come back. 2 large, burly security guards in dark suits stepped forward, grabbing my arms with heavy, aggressive hands. The surrounding guests watched from a distance, murmuring and chuckling at my public humiliation. Evelyn turned her face away, staring at the floor and showing no pity for the man she had promised to love forever. I didn't panic for a single second. I relaxed my shoulders, waiting for the guards to apply their pressure and lose their balance. With a swift, fluid motion, I twisted my left arm, breaking the first guard's grip instantly, and struck him hard in the solar plexus, sending him gasping to the marble floor in pain. Before the second guard could react to his partner falling, I grabbed his wrist, swept his leg with a quick kick, and pinned him to the polished marble floor in a tight, professional lock. He groaned in pain, unable to move an inch. The crowd gasped in shock, several wealthy women shrieking in terror at the display. Julian took a sudden step back, his face turning completely pale as he looked down at his two fallen security guards. You're crazy. You've lost your mind, he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at my face. You're going to federal prison for this assault, Arthur. I will make sure of it personally. I let go of the pin guard and stood up slowly, smoothing down the front of my wet, wrinkled jacket. I don't think so, Julian, I said calmly, my eyes locked onto his trembling ones. In fact, before you call the local police, I think you should look out the ballroom windows right now. Suddenly, the loud, rhythmic thudding of heavy helicopter blades echoed from the dark night sky, shaking the massive glass windows of the ballroom. The wealthy guests looked up in utter confusion as powerful, military-grade searchlights swept across the dark lawn, illuminating the driving rain in bright, blinding beams. A second later, the sound of screeching tires and roaring engines filled the air outside the mansion, drowning out the storm. 5 massive, armored black SUVs tore through the front gates of the estate, their high-beam headlights cutting through the dark rain as they raced up the gravel driveway. The heavy vehicles drifted on the wet gravel, parking in a tight, tactical blockade around the front entrance of the mansion. The doors flew open simultaneously, and dozens of tactical soldiers in full black gear and helmets emerged, carrying military assault rifles and moving with absolute lethal precision. The guests panicked, screaming and running away from the glass windows as the tactical soldiers moved into defensive positions around the courtyard. Richard was trembling beside Evelyn, his face losing all its remaining color. What is happening? Julian, is this a terrorist attack on my home? Julian ran toward the front doors, peering through the glass as he tried to see what was happening outside. This is the military, Richard, he whispered, his voice shaking with a fear he couldn't control. This is a special forces unit. Why are they here? The grand double doors of the ballroom were kicked open with a loud, echoing bang that made the guests shriek. A squad of fully armed tactical soldiers marched into the room, their heavy boots thudding on the polished marble floor as they quickly and efficiently secured all the exits. Behind the soldiers, 3 older, imposing men walked in. They wore formal dark green military uniforms, their shoulders adorned with shiny gold stars and their chests covered in rows of colorful medals. The guests fell completely silent, frozen in fear as they recognized the high-ranking officers who entered. Richard tried to put on a brave face, stepping forward to meet the generals. Generals, please. I am Richard, a respected businessman in this city. There must be some kind of massive mistake. Why are your armed men invading my home and terrifying my guests like this? The 3 generals ignored Richard completely, walking straight past him as if he did not exist. Their sharp eyes were locked onto me. They stopped exactly 2 paces away, stood at attention, and snapped a crisp, synchronized military salute that echoed through the silent ballroom. Commander Vance, the lead general, a stern man with silver hair, announced in a booming voice. Reporting for duty, sir. We have secured the perimeter and cut off all communications from this location. We await your orders. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could hear the rain drumming against the glass. Richard's mouth hung open, his eyes wide with shock. Evelyn gasped, her champagne glass slipping from her fingers and shattering on the marble floor. She stared at me as if she were looking at a ghost. Julian took another step back, his eyes darting toward the back exit, but 2 tactical soldiers immediately blocked his path, their rifles raised. At ease, General Carter, I said, returning the salute with practiced ease. Is the target secured? Yes, Commander, General Carter replied. We have intercepted the shipping manifests. The evidence against Julian Vance is complete. I walked slowly toward Julian, my boots clicking on the floor. He looked at me, his arrogant smirk replaced by a mask of pure terror. Arthur, no, this is a mistake, Julian pleaded, his voice cracking. I didn't know. You didn't know I was the commander of the very task force investigating your illegal activities, Julian? I asked, my voice echoing in the silent room. You used my father-in-law's shipping lanes to smuggle military-grade hardware, I continued. You thought your political connections would protect you. You were wrong. General Carter waved his hand, and 2 soldiers grabbed Julian, slamming him against the wall and cuffing his hands behind his back. Julian screamed, begging Richard to help him. Richard stood frozen, his face paper white. He looked at me, then at the 3 generals, his voice trembling. Arthur, please. We didn't know. We thought you were just a bum. You believed what was convenient for your bank account, Richard, I replied coldly. You wanted a wealthy politician, so you threw away the man who protected this country. Evelyn stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Arthur, please, look at me. I was forced into this. My father threatened to cut me off. I still love you. I looked at her, remembering the 5 years of hell I had endured, always keeping her picture in my pocket. If you loved me, Evelyn, you wouldn't have stood silent while your father called me a parasite. You signed the papers tonight without a second thought, I added, holding up the signed divorce document. You chose Julian's wealth. Now you can share his fate. Wait, what do you mean? Richard stammered, stepping forward. My daughter has nothing to do with Julian's crimes. General Carter stepped between us, his expression stern. Richard, your company's accounts have been frozen. Your assets are seized under suspicion of complicity in smuggling and money laundering. Richard gasped, clutching his chest as he stumbled backward. His wife rushed to support him, both of them looking at the ruin of their empire. Take Julian away, I ordered the soldiers. They dragged Julian out of the ballroom, his loud protests fading into the rainy night. The guests began to whisper, slowly backing away from Richard and Evelyn, trying to distance themselves from the disgraced family. Evelyn fell to her knees, sobbing onto the cold marble floor. Arthur, please. Don't do this to us. We have nothing left. I looked down at her one last time. There was no anger left in my heart, only a cold, empty void. You have your freedom, Evelyn. That is more than I had in the jungle. I turned my back on them, walking out of the ballroom. The 3 generals followed me, their metals clinking softly as we stepped out into the rain. A soldier held the door of the lead black SUV open for me. I climbed inside, the heavy door shutting out the sound of Evelyn's cries. The convoy of black SUVs drove away, their tires throwing up water as they vanished down the dark, tree-lined road, leaving the estate behind. The next morning, the city's news outlets were dominated by the scandal. The headlines read, Local politician arrested for treason. Shipping giant seized. I sat in my new office at the military command center, dressed in my clean, dark green commander uniform. The sun cut through the large glass windows, illuminating the medals on my chest. General Carter entered the room, holding a small wooden box. He set it on my desk. A soldier found this in Julian's desk during the raid, sir. I opened the box. Inside was my father's silver watch, scratched but unbroken. I picked it up, wrapping the metal strap around my wrist. Thank you, General, I said, a weight lifting from my chest. What is the status of the investigation? Julian has confessed to everything, Carter replied. Richard and his family are facing federal charges. They have lost the estate and all their holdings. Keep me updated, I said. I want to make sure the victims of their corruption receive their compensation. A week later, I was walking through a quiet, secluded park near the harbor, enjoying a rare and precious moment of peace. The sky was clear, the water reflecting the bright blue above, and the gentle wind brought the smell of the sea. It was the first time in 5 years that I felt completely free. As I walked, I heard soft, hesitating footsteps on the gravel path behind me. I turned slowly, and my eyes fell upon Evelyn standing there. She was wearing simple, faded clothes instead of her usual designer dresses, and her face was pale, drawn, and completely exhausted from the stress of the last few days. Arthur, she whispered, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Everything is gone. They took the estate, the cars, everything. We are living in a tiny, damp apartment on the edge of the city. My father is very sick, and we have nothing left. Please, Arthur, I am begging you to help us. I stopped, looking down at the woman I had once promised to protect and spend my life with. She looked so small and broken now, completely stripped of her wealth, her family name, and the cold arrogance that had defined her for the past 5 years. There was no grandeur left in her, only desperation. I cannot help you, Evelyn, I said. Quietly, keeping my voice firm and even. The law must take its course, and you must face the consequences of the paths you chose. I am no longer the man you can use to bail your family out of trouble. How can you be so heartless, she cried, grabbing my arm with trembling hands. I was your fiancé. We were supposed to build a life together. How can you stand there and look at me with so much coldness after everything we shared? The man you wanted to marry died in the jungle 5 years ago, Evelyn, I said, gently but firmly pulling my arm away from her grasp. You and your father buried him tonight when you forced me to sign those papers. The man standing before you now is a soldier who has learned to survive without you." She stared at me, her lips trembling as she realized that there was absolutely no warmth or pity left in my eyes. The love we once had been completely extinguished by years of neglect and betrayal. She slowly let her hand drop to her side, tears spilling down her cheeks as she took a step back. "Goodbye, Evelyn," I said, turning away from her. I walked down the paved path toward the edge of the park, not looking back even once as her soft, desperate sobs faded into the background noises of the harbor, leaving our past behind forever. I walked toward the harbor pad, where a massive military transport helicopter was waiting, its blades spinning slowly and generating a powerful wind. The concrete pad was wet, reflecting the dark green navigation lights of the aircraft as the ground crew checked the final pre-flight parameters. The wind from the blades whipped my coat around my legs as I approached the boarding ramp. General Carter was standing near the door, holding a secure military tablet with my next set of orders. He looked up, his expression serious and alert. "We have a new mission, Commander," General Carter said, raising his voice to be heard over the deafening roar of the helicopter engines. "A new threat has been detected in the northern sector, and they need our specialized unit on the ground immediately." I took the tablet from him, scanning the mission details and the satellite maps. My heart began to beat with a familiar, steady rhythm. The politics of the city, the betrayal, and the greed were behind me. This was where I belonged, in the cold, clear reality of duty. I climbed up the ramp into the helicopter, securing my harness in the dim, green-tinted cabin. The crew chief closed the heavy side door with a loud thud, sealing us inside and cutting off the sound of the wind, leaving only the deep vibration of the engines. The helicopter lifted off the ground, rising quickly over the harbor and the city skyline. I looked out the small round window, watching the lights of the city shrink into a tiny grid below us. The world that had rejected me was now just a distant map. The city where I had suffered so much betrayal and humiliation was now just a collection of tiny, fading lights, disappearing into the dark horizon. I felt no regret, no sadness, and no longing. My true home was in the sky, heading toward the next battle. I touched the silver watch on my wrist, feeling its steady, reassuring tick against my skin. It was a reminder of my father, of where I came from, and of the strength that had kept me alive. I was ready for whatever lay ahead in the dark. The helicopter turned north, flying directly into the heavy clouds as the sun set, leaving the past behind forever. I closed my eyes, letting the vibration of the aircraft wash over me as we flew toward the unknown, a commander returning to his true war.